Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Cindy Russell, co-chair of the Santa Clara County Medical Association's Environmental Health Committee. We welcome you to tonight's presentation with Dr. Robert Gould, who will discuss the health and environmental impacts of nuclear weapons and war. Thank you for joining us. This webinar is the first in our four-part Environment and Health webinar series 2026, and we have upcoming webinars which will feature well-known pediatrician and author Dr. Robert Lustig discussing obesogens on April 14th, that's next week. And we have Dr. Desiree Lebaud reviewing health impacts of microplastics on April 28th. And on Tuesday, May 5th, we have Dr. Tracy Woodruff and Dr. Nick Chartres discussing corporate determinants of health, industry influence in science, and the UCSF Internal Industry Document Library. All webinars are on Tuesdays, and they start at 6 p.m. They're an hour long. And you can sign up for these events by going to SCCMA.org and then go to events. Just a little bit about the Santa Clara County Medical Association. It's a professional organization representing more than 4,700 physicians across all specialties, practice settings, and stages of their careers. Excuse me, I have a little cold. And their mission is to support physicians in delivering the highest quality care to their patients. The SCCMA works through advocacy, education, and community engagement with local, state, and national partners to promote the practice of medicine, advance public health, and protect the well-being of both physicians and patients. And today's webinar is part of the SCCMA's ongoing commitment to provide timely, relevant, and practical information to the medical community. The SCCMA is a wonderful organization. I'm proud to be part of it. And before we start, a few things to mention. This program is being recorded. It will be posted on the SCCM website, on the Environmental Health webpage for viewing later, and you can also see prior webinars on environmental health from the past couple of years as well. And you're going to be muted during the entire program and even for questions, but we invite you to post questions anytime in the Q&A box. We will not have live video, live audio questions, and we will take the questions for Dr. Gould, of course, at the end of the program. We're going to try to post some resources during the program in the chat box, but if not, they will be available on the website, linked to the video later. Dr. Robert Gould worked as a pathologist for over 30 years at San Jose Kaiser, and since 2012 has been an adjunct assistant professor at UCSF, serving as collaborator with a program on reproductive health and the environment. He's been a physician leader in the field of environmental health for decades and has expertise on nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. Dr. Gould's been president of the San Francisco Bay chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility since 1989, and he served twice as national PSR president. He's been on the board of the International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War since 2017, is now regional vice president for North America. In October, he spoke at their World Congress held in Nagasaki, commemorating the 80th anniversary of twin bombings that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Dr. Gould's also been chairperson of the Peace Caucus in affiliation with the American Public Health Association since 1990. And for over 30 years, Dr. Gould's been an active member of our Environmental Health Committee at the Santa Clara County Medical Association's chapter of the California Medical Association. And through his work, he's authored and co-authored numerous resolutions adopted as policy by the CMA. Dr. Gould's given hundreds of presentations over the past 35 years on a wide range of health and environmental issues in local, national, and international meetings, and has published over 20 peer-reviewed and other articles and book chapters on these subjects. And tonight's topic is especially timely as the risk, as you know, of nuclear war is greater now than it has been in decades. We're going to learn a lot from Dr. Gould, and we're very honored to have you speak to us tonight. Thank you, Dr. Gould.
Greetings, everybody, and I want to first off really express my great appreciation for the leadership of Cindy on our Environmental Health Committee and the extraordinary work of Cindy, other members of our committee, and Emily Korn of our talking about the health and environmental impacts of nuclear weapons and war, which is certainly for me and for many others central to our attention these days. I have no conflicts to declare, and I just want to acknowledge that our chapter of PSR sits on the unceded ancestral homeland of a variety of Native American peoples who were and PSR was 65 years ago, public health, and we work to protect human life from the gravest threats to health and survival. Many of our members, including myself, work on one of our existential issues, that being of climate change and related environmental health issues. But since our founding in 1961, many of us, including myself, have also worked on issues of the dangers posed by nuclear weapons. For our work in 1985 as the affiliate of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, we were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for our work to stem the very dangerous nuclear confrontation between the United States and the then Soviet Union. I'm very honored to have known three of the founding members depicted here. Sid Alexander on the right, a prominent cardiologist in Boston Lahey Clinic. In the center is Victor Seidel, my professor of community medicine at Einstein Medical College and former president of American Public Health Association, who is my lifelong mentor. And on the left is Jack Geiger, who was also the founding president of Physicians for Human Rights and organized the Freedom Health Clinics in Mississippi in 1964, very famously writing on prescription pads for his impoverished patients food, illustrating our long-term commitment to social justice. We have also been very concerned through the years of the context for where a nuclear war could take place. And certainly there's been an unbelievable feeling of deja vu in the current period in terms of issues that we thought we had dealt with in the past. Back in 2003, we spoke out because of what we saw as the related nuclear dangers of the Iraq War. And in 2008, presaging our current situation, we were worried about the possibility of an October surprise where there might be an attack on Iran at that time. We agree with the New York Times, editorializing on the day of the current war on Iran was initiated by President Trump, that this attack is reckless, and as a result, both IPPNW and PSR issued a statement condemning the strikes against Iran that were initiated at that time and calling for return to negotiations because of our concerns that remain that this could escalate into a nuclear conflict. Of course, we've seen over the last number of weeks how this has escalated to the point where I, as you did, woke up today wondering what was going to happen at 5 o'clock tonight. Was President Trump going to follow through in his threat to destroy Iranian Persian civilization? And I'm very happy to be relieved after following this for the day that we seem to have a reprieve for 2 weeks. But this still remains a very dangerous situation for a variety of reasons. As a result, this morning, PSR, IPPNW, and Physicians for Human Rights issued a statement calling for an end to all fighting in Iran, and for all the reasons that I was saying, including the potential for attacks on a nuclear power plant that could also lead to a radiological emergency. So at this point, we're holding our breath and hoping that this de-escalates and that real negotiations to end the war will commence and be lasting. But it all reminds us, as the editorial board of the New York Times opined a number of years ago, that situations like this could be the pretext for whereby the world could be destroyed in a flash for what we know about the dangerous aspects of nuclear weapons. These have been well chronicled by Annie Jacobson in her book, Nuclear War Scenario, which I would suggest reading. It's extremely well researched, has a lot of insider information, and makes the case why we need to abolish nuclear weapons, because of how quickly things could escalate out of control and lead to a nuclear conflict, which I'll be providing some additional evidence for in my foregoing remarks. We certainly know about the dangers of nuclear weapons from the 2 times they've been used, in both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A few days later, in 1945, approximately 210,000 innocent civilians died from the effects of blast and heat, and by the end of 1945, the effects of radiation as well. Many of the early years of PSR, and still going on, have involved presentations in what we would call the bombing run, where we would cover issues like this: what would be the different distances from a detonation in terms of people being incinerated, property being destroyed by heat and blast. And as you could see on the lower part of this graph, and this would be for a scenario for a 20 megaton ground-based nuclear detonation above a city, that we would have different doses of radiation, all which would have not only acute effects if people would die from high doses, but lingering effects that we've been able to recognize through studies of the survivors of the bombings, the Japanese and other Hibakusha, who were plagued with radiation-related illnesses such as immune suppression, developmental and genetic defects, and of course cancer. Concerns about the dangers of nuclear weapons pervaded our culture and our history in the early 1950s. Worried about the possibility of a Soviet attack, many people were involved in civil defense strategies, bomb shelters and such. I remember growing up in the duck and cover days in the 1950s, where we would practice faultily to protect ourselves from a nuclear war by going under our desks. The other issues, while we were concerned about Soviet attacks, we were paying little attention to the dangers posed by our own weapon systems, as Eric Schlosser chronicled in Command and Control, also made into a movie, which talked about, discussed in detail, all of the times that we came so close to perishing in a nuclear conflict. Conflicts that could be triggered by false warnings of a flock of geese or other sorts of things that would indicate that we might be under attack, and which could have led to a retaliatory attack which could have destroyed the planet. In one such episode, in 1961, a nuclear bomb was dropped over North Carolina and had a number of fail-safe mechanisms, three which failed. The fourth kept it from exploding. It was 260 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, and reflective of the dangers that we faced even from our own arsenal. It's because of issues like these that in the 50s and 60s there was a widespread anti-nuclear movement, expertly chronicled by historian Lawrence Whitner. It included the campaign for nuclear disarmament, depicted here in Great Britain. And many doctors who became members of PSR and others were very involved in early protests against the above-ground nuclear detonation. In fact, the forerunner to the American Academy of Pediatrics Environmental Health Committee, which produces the green books that guide environmental health practice, came from the 1957 formation of the Committee on Radiation Hazards and Epidemiology of Malformations, looking for what the impact of nuclear testing would be. Many doctors involved in PSR also participated in the baby tooth survey that collected baby teeth to document the impacts of strontium-90 and other radioactive elements that would collect in bones and teeth, to document what those impacts were. It was because of issues like these that the founders of PSR issued the seminal report, series of reports in the New England Journal of Medicine in May of 1962, The Medical Consequences of Thermonuclear War, a publication that culminated from real struggle with the editors who felt this wasn't necessarily the best place for physicians to interact, should more consequence on treating their patients, not deal with the more upstream issues. We prevailed, got this published, and this series documented what the impacts even after Hiroshima were. 88% nurses dead, 80% of hospitals destroyed, 90% of doctors were dead, which underscored our organization's lifetime commitment to preventing nuclear war, that there is no cure, only prevention, which has guided our work since. It was efforts like these that led to President Kennedy signing the Limited Test Ban Treaty in 1963 that forbade the above-ground testing of nuclear weapons. Although some countries did not obey that treaty, most did. But it then led to the proliferation of nuclear weapons testing in underground facilities, such as the widespread Atomic Energy Commission and Department of Energy facilities, that by the 1980s, there were over 70,000 nuclear weapons around the world. It was dangers of these that provoked Dan Ellsberg, who I'm honored to have been a colleague and friend who has worked with him on these issues, to release, who's profiled in the film The Most Dangerous Man in America, to release the Pentagon Papers, which made him a hero to me when I was in college for divulging the secrets of our wars in Indochina that killed so many innocent civilians throughout Southeast Asia. Dan released the Pentagon Papers in many ways because he was very concerned about nuclear risks that he also was aware of. And he hid that cache of documents for many years. What Dan was worried about was a potential use of nuclear weapons in Vietnam, and a number of years ago in the New York Times, it was revealed in this top secret document that was indeed entertained to be used in Vietnam. Dan continued to document this and work off of the documents that he had stored in his brilliant doomsday machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. One thing that Dan revealed was this top secret document that when he was asked by the Kennedy administration to find out why is the Air Force and other agencies building so many weapons, was just for pork barrel type issues, he asked the Joint Chiefs, what's up? And he received this document for the President eyes only that revealed that our agencies and military were planning through the single integrated operational plan for the potential death which would constitute 100 holocausts, 6 million people, 600 million people dying. This graph illustrates that over the first 6 months, 325 million people would perish from heat blast and radiation. This would be our enemies, the Soviet Union, side bombings of China, but included in what would be the additional 275 million people would be those countries in between, neutral countries, even NATO allies. We're still under the sword of Damocles these days. Approximately over 12,000 nuclear warheads are deployed in 14 countries, and as of 2025, the US, Russia, France, and UK hold approximately 2,100 of these on high alert, that they can go off under a half hour, some as quickly as 15 minutes, destroy cities around the world, and plunge us into a planet-ending nuclear holocaust. It was issues like these that prompted the publication in April 1998 of another series of articles in the New England Journal of Medicine, Accidental Nuclear War, a Post-Cold War Assessment. This was based on Department of Energy and Department of Defense documents that we plugged in the numbers of what would happen if one Russian submarine with multiple missiles, with multiple warheads, were seized by a terrorist operation or fired their missiles in error or miscommunication of the sort that was documented by Schlosser in the book I mentioned earlier. Here's a map of the San Francisco Bay Area illustrating many of the targets that you all are well familiar with as areas in our own metropolitan area. And when we ran the numbers, we came up with immediate deaths after an accidental nuclear attack involving just one errant submarine of being close to 7 million, with about 739,000 in the San Francisco area. And this does not count the subsequent deaths, the subsequent disease from radiation, etc. And was this just a fictional type of thing? Well, actually, back in 1995, we came very close to such a thing happening. The United States, in partnership with Norway, released a civilian satellite out of Norway that the Russians took to be an incoming nuclear attack and came within 3 to 5 minutes from issuing a retaliatory attack that could have destroyed the planet. We know that President Yeltsin was drinking pretty heavily at the time, and in a way that's redolent over our own concerns about our current president and his mental status. This illustrates how like one single unstable person could initiate a nuclear war. Although I would counsel at the same time that we should not be dissuaded from the dangers of these by the possibility of employing artificial intelligence for such targeting or decision circumstances. Just a few months ago, a study indicated that when AI was making the decisions about firing nuclear weapons, 95% of the times it opted to use nuclear weapons, illustrating that the problems surmount human as well as computer control. Beyond the dangers of nuclear war happening in these types of scenarios, we also have to be concerned about the profound health and environmental health consequences of the development, transport, production of nuclear weapons. As one of our founders, Dr. Bernard Lowndes, said in a Montreal conference of IPPNW in 1988, while no nuclear weapons have been detonated in war since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a kind of secret, low-intensity radioactive warfare has been waged against unsuspecting populations. This started with the detonation of the Trinity explosion that developed the weapon, one of the weapons that was used in Japan just in July of 1945. More recent studies have indicated that the fallout from this blast reached 46 states, Canada, and Mexico in much greater amounts than had previously been noted, including, of course, the epicenter in the New Mexico testing site. Many of these health effects were hidden from the start, from the people in New Mexico, as well as the struck populations in Japan, as well as in many areas that were subject to global nuclear weapons testing. In New Mexico, Tino Cordova is a co-founder of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium, who's been struggling with her community members for years to get compensation for the impacts of the Trinity tests. Many of those expected that the release of the film Oppenheimer would lead to the compensation for people who had never been rewarded for their diseases. There was much community information collected about neighbors who suffered from cancer and other dread diseases, leading to significant concerns among the community. And it was hoped that with the wake of this, there would be a revision of the Radioactive Environmental Compensation Act to support community members. The U.S. Senate voted to expand radiation exposure for areas that had not been covered from areas of previous nuclear testing, including New Mexico, but because of Speaker Johnson's opposition, this did not get moved through the House, which led to us supporting, and many other organizations such as Union of Concerned Scientists, to support lobbying efforts around the country and within Washington, D.C. to get their just compensation. Finally, last year, the Speaker allowed this to advance to be able to pass the so-called Big Beautiful Budget Bill. But unfortunately, although some people were awarded short-term relief in terms of compensation under this revised Radioactive Exposure Compensation Act, many of these people would not, many communities still were not covered. And of course, the balance of this bill meant that while people might get short-term compensation, they would get cuts to their Medicare, their Medicaid, and other things that we've been fighting within Santa Clara County Medical Association and throughout California Medical Association in terms of cutbacks of basic health care programs. Other populations impacted included those downwind from the nuclear weapons testing. This is the early 50s. The nuclear weapons site, Nevada test site, is dozens of miles from the Las Vegas. Releases of radioactive iodine, which occurred from Hanford or from the nuclear weapons testing, led to radioactive iodine falling down in the rain, getting in grass. Cows ate the grass. Milk was shipped all around the countries, which is why you had increased incidence of thyroid cancer from radioactive iodine 131 all over the country, not just in the immediate downwind areas. In 1997, the National Cancer Institute said that there were anywhere from 11,000 to 212,000 increased numbers of thyroid cancer resulting from this. If one looked at total nuclear weapons testing and radioactive elements. It was estimated by the NCI that by the year 2000, approximately up to 800,000 people would have gotten cancer or gotten cancer prematurely diagnosed from the US testing alone, double that including the Soviet testing. Beyond the testing itself, we have to think of the 600,000 people who were toiled in the fields of the bomb, as documented in the brilliant article by Arjun Makhijani of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists in 2001. This ranged from Native American miners of uranium to those who worked in the Atomic Energy Commission and Department of Energy plants, who suffered from radioactive exposures, never were adequately monitored. So if they developed chronic diseases, genetic defects, or cancers, there was never any smoking gun. You say, well, it's probably because you're a smoker, not because you've been exposed to these things. People ultimately got compensation, but many people died before that came through in the earlier iterations of compensation. Many sites involved with the complex are extremely contaminated. Hanford, which produced plutonium, has about 177 canisters filled with over 56 million gallons of highly toxic and radioactive material that's moving towards the Columbia River and contaminating aquifers. This has never been adequately cleaned up, although military contractors have gotten tens of millions of dollars for their inability to deal with this problem. Plutonium levels near Los Alamos are similar to Chernobyl, and New Mexico has had to rebuke the federal agencies over nuclear waste at Los Alamos. Closer to home, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which, like Los Alamos, is involved with the development of nuclear weapons. There have been approximately 1 million curies of radiation released since the 1960s. That's an enormous amount. And like many nuclear weapons facilities, is on the Superfund list of worst contaminated sites in the U.S. due to a combination of radioactive waste as well as toxic chemical waste as well. Despite these legacy issues, the National Nuclear Security Administration has canceled public engagement for efforts now to increase plutonium use at Livermore, Los Alamos, and throughout the weapons complex, with the desires to expand our nuclear weapons production to manufacture new plutonium pits rather than recycling old pits from old weapons for the new nuclear weapons we are planning to build. Beyond our national shores, testing killed untold thousands around the world. These are some of the sites that were heavily impacted by testing, largely colonized regions such as the South Pacific, where this type of nuclear testing took place. Very notable of this are the Marshall Islands, where the U.S. detonated 67 nuclear explosions between 1946 and 1958, displacing the native populations, destroying their culture with explosive force way greater than that was detonated within the nuclear test site in Nevada or released in Chernobyl. And Marshallese, like their compatriots in New Mexico and other downwinders in the United States, are still seeking justice for the U.S. nuclear tests that caused much disease and, again, destroyed their homelands. As an example of such testing literally coming home, want to salute the work of the Committee to Bridge the Gap, and the late Dan Hirsch, for their work documenting what was the impacts of that Pacific testing on sailors who were heavily contaminated when the test went awry and exploded over naval vessels. Many of these vessels either on their own power or were towed to Bayview Hunters Point in southeast San Francisco, where they were sandblasted willy-nilly. Radioactive material that were on these ships went all over the neighborhoods. They still have not been adequately tested or cleaned up, although there's moves afoot that are continuing to release this land for new housing despite the lack of cleanup and protection of workers who are involved with rejuvenating this neighborhood. These are just some examples of what the National Academy of Sciences said in 2000, that many of the DOE nuclear weapon sites would remain hazardous, posing risks to humans and the environment for tens of even hundreds of thousands of years. It's all issues like this, particularly the continued dangers of nuclear weapons, that has led the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists to annually upgrade the doomsday clock, now advanced to 85 seconds to midnight this year, because the combination of nuclear weapons threats, the threats posed by global warming, biological threats, and the increasing incorporation of AI into all of the above. We now have a world where, as I mentioned before, we have over 12,000 nuclear warheads distributed in areas like this, but even a nuclear weapons conflict between some of the smaller nuclear weapon states, in this case in South Asia, between Pakistan and India, could have significant worldwide effects. My dear departed friend, Dr. Chawla of the Indian Doctors for Peace and Development, shared this article with me back in 2002, that a direct conflict between India and Pakistan could result in 12 million or more dead. But we also have to be concerned by increasingly improving research that has advanced beyond Carl Sagan's notable work on nuclear winter in the late 1980s, that even a small regional nuclear conflict could have global impact. So even 100 Hiroshima-sized bombs, by incinerating cities, and the soot that would block out sunlight would block out the sunlight and lead to major reduction in corn, maize, corn, wheat, and rice production in 5 years. That could lead 2 billion people to be risk of severe malnutrition. It was evidence like this that led to a major effort among our health professional communities to have a resurgence in our efforts to prevent nuclear war because of these humanitarian impacts. The American Medical Association in 2015 reaffirmed their position to eliminate nuclear weapons, a position that we in California Medical Association also adopted back in 1997. This movement spread throughout the world and greatly aided the efforts to develop the treaty to prohibit on the prohibition of nuclear weapons that was adopted in 2017. It voted in favor in the UN by an overwhelming number of nations and led to the award of the Nobel Peace Prize to the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, which was co-founded by many of our colleagues within IPPNW. Currently, many nations, over 74 states, are state parties to the treaty with an additional 25 signatories. The problem is that the nuclear weapons possessing states have refused to sign this, despite the fact that President Obama in 2009 galvanized world attention with his call for the elimination of nuclear weapons. The U.S., since his administration and continuing, has called for the nuclear weapon states not to support this treaty. Instead, President Obama initiated the buildup of nuclear weapons that at the time called for over $1 trillion to be spent over 30 years to modernize our nuclear weapons arsenal. That's anywhere from $4 to $6 million every hour to make our nuclear weapons arsenal more dangerous. And again, the U.S. urged our allies to withdraw from the treaty. So we face a situation that 80 years after the Trinity test in New Mexico, the dangers of nuclear war have never been higher. We certainly are aware of this from the aggressive attacks of President Putin and Russians on Ukraine that has led to situations that could provoke a nuclear conflict between the two main superpowers that possess over 87% of nuclear weapons, and also raise issues of radioactive release from the proximity of the warfare that's been going on since 2022 to a variety of nuclear power facilities as well. As this map illustrates, not only Russia and the U.S., but many of our allies, some nuclear weapons possessing states, others that we have nuclear weapons sharing agreements, raised the possibility of the current war in Ukraine getting out of hand, underscored by the fact that President Macron of France would allow temporary deployment of nuclear-armed jets to European allies as well. Also, what's been happening that's been very dangerous is the collapse of the major treaties that were predominantly agreed to by the United States, Soviet Union, then Russia, including the New START Treaty of 2010, which puts significant limits on the strategic arms, the ICBMs and such, that I indicated before could plunge the world into destruction within a matter of a half hour. Now, both the United States has withdrawn from this treaty. Russia has agreed to abide by it for another year, but we need to return to that type of protocol. While arms control has been eroding, President Trump has weighed more and called for new nuclear arms and underground tests of nuclear weapons, which led to PSR and IPPNW to issue this declaration a few months ago, calling for continued abiding by the treaties and not starting up a new era of nuclear weapons testing. That was underscored by one of our IPPNW and PSR leaders, Ira Helfand, on Democracy Now! In the wake of that statement. It's not just Russia that we're building our nuclear weapons for. In terms of our quote-unquote pivot to the Pacific, new nuclear weapons are being expressly built for Chinese hardened targets and weapons while we prep for a possible showdown over Taiwan. And in terms of thinking about all of the issues around Greenland, represented by new oil fields being made available by global warming, we are gearing up for a potential conflict over these oil sources in the Arctic, which underscores a lot of President Trump's aggressive designs on Greenland. So we find ourselves, as a recent New York Times series showed, literally at the brink of our planetary destruction. This was underscored by an update of our nuclear famine work by Dr. Matt Bivens of the Internet of IPPNW back in 2022, which upgraded our scenarios. On the left hand was that there would be more destruction and varying scenarios if we're talking about a conflict that the original modeling had been between India and Pakistan, a regional war having global implications. But we also modeled what would happen from a full-scale war between the Russia and the United States, evinced by the conflict in Ukraine coming out of hand, where the estimate that 5 billion people out of 6.7 billion worldwide would be dead within 2 years from much deeper levels of malnutrition and famine than had been reflected in the older models. Because of this, our organizations have been very organized in developing what we call the Back from the Brink movement. The Back from the Brink Coalition has 5 major planks that you could view on preventnuclearwar.org, renouncing the option of using nuclear weapons first, ending the sole unchecked authority of any U.S. president to launch a nuclear attack, evinced by our current situation, of course, taking U.S. nuclear weapons off hair-trigger alert, canceling the plan to replace the arsenal with enhanced weapons, and pursuing a verifiable agreement, such as a treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons, to make sure this happens. We've had resolutions passed at the San Francisco Board of Supes back in 2018, and both the California Assembly and Senate passed a resolution back calling for this back in 2018 as well. We have many organizations, municipalities, state legislative bodies that have signed on to this, and this work is also carried to the oldest and largest public health association in the world, the American Public Health Association, where I work within the Peace Caucus, where we drafted a policy that the APHA passed back in 2020 toward a world free of nuclear weapons, supporting all of the planks of the Back from the Brink movement. This has been adopted multiple times, including last July by the U.S. Conference of Mayors, adopting a resolution supporting the Back from the Brink planks initiated by Mayors for Peace, and many health experts continue to raise alarm over the risk of nuclear war. So, for example, some of you may be aware or remember the series of editorials that was put out in the Lancet organizing the medical community in multiple journals to have simultaneous editorials about the dangers of global warming. A similar series of synchronized editorials on reducing the risks of nuclear war were engendered a few years ago. This is a list. I don't expect you to be able to read it all, but gives you a feeling for all the journals that were co-signatories to reducing nuclear risks. Nobel laureates and nuclear experts also promulgated a declaration pressing for action on nuclear dangers commensurate with our Back from the Brink campaign last year at the 80th anniversary of the Trinity test in New Mexico. And we now have legislation that's been, I believe, sponsored by over 50 members of Congress, introduced in the Senate by Senator Markey and others in the House, to a resolution to halt and reverse the nuclear arms race, also in parallel with the work of the Back from the Brink. All of this leads to the very important statement by the late Sir Joseph Rothblatt, himself a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize from his leadership of the Pugwash organization. Dr. Rothblatt was the sole defector from the Manhattan Project building a nuclear bomb because he realized that the bomb was no longer to be used against Nazi Germany, which had a nuclear weapons program, but Japan that did not. And as he informed us in a conjoint meeting in 2002 in Washington, D.C., a colossal effort will be required, the courage and the will to embark on this great task, to restore sanity in our policies, humanity in our actions, and a sense of belonging to the human race, which really underscores our challenge. However, all of the difficult work that we still face to eliminate the scourge of nuclear weapons faces the issue that not many people are aware of it. So we're forced to try to figure out how to best connect our concerns about nuclear weapons to many of the other issues that Americans and other people around the world face. One of these major issues is certainly what the economic effects of continuing to wage warfare and to build nuclear weapons represents. As summed up by President Eisenhower back in the 1950s, every gun that is made, every rocket fired, signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and not clothed. We see this in the nuclear weapons budgets. The $32 billion for the Department of Energy actually building the warheads themselves, which is half of the total expenditures, which would include delivery systems, is about $32 billion a year. This translates into the average cost for nuclear weapons development, being the warheads and the delivery systems, was $324 for every person in the United States. This is at a time when affordability is a major issue for our population. In terms of trade-offs for other things, this was developed by ICANN during the COVID epidemic, how that $35 or so billion for nuclear weapons warheads would translate to all these beds in intensive care, ventilators, nurses, and doctors. You get the point. We've spent over $21 trillion on over the 20 years since the wars of terror, which are still being fought around the world in areas throughout the world, reflecting bipartisan support for the types of bombings that we're seeing in Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran today. Spending on two current wars has been at least $188 billion in Ukraine, $22.7 billion and counting in Gaza as well, with not a lot of transparency on those figures. When we're looking at what our health systems and health providers face, we see that the $1 trillion that we're facing to pay the military in the current budget talks, that translates into over 189 million adults in Medicaid for a year, or 292 million children, or being able to pay for over 7 million registered nurses for 1 year. Despite all of this, the White House is now seeking an additional 40% increase in military spending, much of it to pay for the $1 to $2 billion every day that's been waged in the Iran conflict. This is occurring at a time, of course, where our climate health is being very threatened by destruction of our regulatory system and our government's ability to deal with climate change, which is additionally being advanced by destroying the basis to produce the renewable energy that we need to get off fossil fuels, or to wage war on all of the species that get in the way of oil drilling. President Trump has hinged his policy on a philosophy of energy dominance. We continue to be self-reliant on fossil fuels to the detriment of the alternative energy systems we need to combat global warming, to be able to wage incessant warfare around the world. If we look at the climate change impacts of the wars on terror as chronicled by the Cost of War Project, in 2019, over 1.2 billion metric tons of greenhouse gases have been emitted, and the wars in Ukraine, as well as in Gaza, have had an immense effect on our climate crisis, and certainly the continuing war in Iran as well, including the significant respiratory health impacts posed by the black rain that was reported in Tehran about a month ago from the incineration of oil facilities. We face a very dangerous situation where I would submit that we have a government that's beholden to one, I would postulate, lunatic individual who says his vision of power is restrained only by his own morality, and who has said that war is essential spending priority, the military, not childcare, not climate change restitution, not educational systems. The list can go on and on about all that's been damaged. This underscores the significant remarks of Martin Luther King back in 1967, about 59 years ago, at the Riverside Church, announcing his unity of the civil rights movement with the anti-war movement at the time, that a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense and on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. And I think this was underscored by the very galvanizing remarks by Pope Leo the other day in his Easter sermon, calling an end to the conflicts in the Middle East. This is taken up by our physicians in PSR and allied organizations who continue to show up at No Kings rallies and other mass protests that we think are necessary to change the direction of our country. I'll end my talk there with some information about our organization and urge all of you, particularly if we have this little 2-week pause before the war might start again and get real dangerous all of a sudden, to call the congressional switchboard, talk to your representatives, and speak out boldly to oppose any continued war, to speak out against continuing nuclear weapons. We have a number of resources that you could reach here. I urge you to join our efforts within PSR. Here are a number of references for you, and as well included with the references is an article that I'm very grateful to my comrades within the Santa Clara County Medical Association, the most recent journal published an article about the nuclear weapons dangers I authored here and here. And thank you for attending the webinar, and I hope we have some chance for questions. Sorry for going things so quickly. There was a lot to offer. I really appreciate the opportunity at such dangerous times.